What if I told you the greatest danger facing Christians right now isn't what you see, but what you're ignoring? If these words stir something within you, if you sense the weight of the unseen battle, do not stand alone. Subscribe now, not for mere content, but to arm yourself with truth, and let your voice be heard in the comments, for silence has never won a war. There are moments in history when the air itself seems to carry an unspoken warning, when the shadows stretch longer than they should, and the silence before the storm is heavy with unseen conflict. These are not mere seasons of misfortune, nor are they simply dark days in an ever-turning world. They are rather the gathering clouds of a war that does not rage on battlefields of earth and stone, but in the unseen realms where the destinies of men are shaped. The crisis that looms ahead is not only one of flesh and blood, it is one of the spirit. A conflict that will test the hearts of the faithful and weigh the resolve of those who claim to stand firm. The enemy is not idle, nor has he ever been. He does not march openly in the daylight where he might be easily opposed, but rather he works in the unnoticed places, in the small compromises, in the whispers that sow doubt before the sword ever strikes. He is a master of timing, not launching his assault in moments of fervor, but in times of complacency, when vigilance has grown weak and when the defenses of the soul have been neglected. The greatest danger is not in the open attack, but in the unseen erosion, in the quiet slipping away of certainty until a man no longer remembers what it was he swore to defend. To believe that disaster is only what the eye can see is to already be deceived. There will be wars, yes. There will be famine and hardship. Laws will shift, and men will call evil good and good evil. Things must come. But the deeper battle, the one that truly matters, is not whether the world falters, but whether your soul stands. Will you hold your ground when all around you falls into confusion? Will your faith withstand the pressure when the very foundations beneath your feet begin to shake? Men prepare for the wrong dangers. They fortify their homes against thieves and their bodies against illness, yet their souls lie defenseless against the far graver peril of spiritual decay. A house can be rebuilt, and a wounded body can heal, but a faith that has been surrendered, a conscience that has been dulled, a soul that has given way to fear, these are losses not so easily restored. If men saw with clearer eyes, they would rush to guard their hearts with the same urgency with which they defend their wealth. But the great lie, the cunning trick, is that they do not see the danger until it is too late. A man does not wake up one day and renounce the truth all at once. He first neglects it. He first allows it to become something distant, something theoretical rather than alive. He lets the urgency fade, the watchfulness wane. He tells himself that the battle is not yet upon him, that he has time yet to prepare. And then, when the day of trial comes, he reaches for a sword that has rusted in its sheath, and he finds himself defenseless, not because he lacked the means to fight, but because he never believed the war would come. The war has already begun. It does not announce itself with trumpet calls or banners waving in the wind. It does not come with an army that can be counted or a battlefield that can be marked on a map. It comes in the slow erosion of truth, in the creeping apathy of the heart, in the dulling of conviction until what once was firm has become frail. It is a war not of force, but of persuasion, a battle not of steel, but of spirit. And it is fought every day in the choices a man makes when no one is watching. To be ready is not to wait in fear, but to stand in vigilance. It is to sharpen the mind with truth, to strengthen the heart with prayer, to train the soul in endurance. It is to be so rooted in what is good that when the winds of deception blow, they do not shake you. It is to know, not merely to feel, that the strength of God is greater than the schemes of the enemy. There is no neutrality in this battle. A man is either advancing or retreating, strengthening his defenses or letting them crumble. There is no safety in standing still. To ignore the coming storm does not mean that it will pass you by. It only ensures that you will be unprepared when it arrives. Those who think themselves immune to deception are already deceived. Those who believe themselves too strong to fall have already begun to stumble. The wise do not ask whether the attack will come. They ask whether they will be found ready when it does. The time is short. not in the sense that men might measure it, but in the urgency with which one must prepare. The night does not warn the traveler before it falls, and the enemy does not send notice before he strikes. To delay is to risk everything, and the cost of delay is greater than most are willing to imagine. The question then is not whether the crisis will come, nor whether the battle will be fought. These things are certain. The question is whether you will be ready when it does. It is a dangerous mistake to think the enemy only works through grand and terrible moments, the kind that split the sky and shake the earth. The truth is far more unsettling. He seldom comes with a roar, for a roar would startle the soul into wakefulness. Instead, he comes softly, silently, slipping into the unnoticed corners of your mind and heart, like a shadow lengthening at dusk, so gradual that you do not see the darkness until it has already consumed the light. His work is often quiet, almost polite. There is no sudden dramatic rejection of truth, only a slow drift, like a boat untied from the dock, inching away so imperceptibly that by the time you notice, the shore is a distant line on the horizon. He does not ask you to denounce your faith outright, for that would be too obvious. Instead, he plants a question, not a bold accusation against God's goodness, but a faint whisper. Did he really say? Doubt rarely enters with a shout. It is a sigh, a lingering glance at the world's comforts, a quiet voice suggesting that perhaps the fight is not as fierce as you once believed. You still pray, but with less urgency. You still read the word, but with less hunger. Your faith remains, but it is a little more hesitant, a little less sure. And what feels like a small, harmless shift is, in reality, the opening of a door. Fear, too, comes in disguise. It does not always arrive like a storm breaking upon your heart. It creeps in as a subtle anxiety, an unspoken worry about the future, a nagging concern about what others might think, a persistent question of whether God will really come through this time. The enemy does not need to paralyze you with terror. He only needs to nudge you into a state of constant unease, where your mind is so preoccupied with the what-ifs that you have no strength left to focus on the what is. Distraction, however, is his most cunning tool. He does not need to convince you to hate God. He only needs to make you forget him. There is no need for a violent rebellion against heaven if he can simply fill your mind with lesser things. 1,000 small diversions will do the work of one great sin. A busy schedule, a harmless hobby, an endless stream of news and entertainment. None of these are evil in themselves, but when they slowly crowd out prayer, silence, and reflection, the damage is done. You might still speak of your devotion, but it becomes a second-hand faith, something remembered rather than experienced. The enemy will gladly let you keep your religion, so long as it remains a faint echo rather than a present reality. He does not fear an empty faith, for an empty faith makes no difference in the world. He fears only a faith that burns, one that prays with fire, speaks with boldness, and lives with conviction. And so his attacks are rarely loud. He would rather lull you to sleep than startle you awake. He would rather have you distracted than defiant. His aim is not to shatter your faith in an instant, but to hollow it out over time, until one day, when the real test comes, you find yourself grasping for a strength that has long since faded. The great danger is that these subtle attacks are easy to dismiss. It is simple to recognize a crisis when it crashes into your life like a wave, but far harder to notice the slow erosion of your soul when the tide gently pulls at the sand each day. The most effective lies are the ones wrapped in half-truths. The most dangerous battles are the ones you do not realize you are fighting. The enemy knows that a sudden, violent blow might drive you to your knees in prayer, but a soft whisper can lull you into complacency. He understands that fear may push you into God's arms, but quiet distraction will draw you away without a struggle. It is not the thunderclap that undoes a man. It is the constant drip of water on stone, wearing down his resolve bit by bit. The question is not whether you are facing an obvious attack, but whether you have grown too comfortable in the absence of one. It is not whether you have seen the enemy's hand, but whether you have noticed the small spaces where he has planted seeds of doubt, fear, and distraction. For if you wait until the roar to recognize the battle, you may already have lost the war. There is no greater threat to the soul than the quiet, creeping poison of complacency. It is not a dramatic fall, not an open rebellion, not a deliberate turning away from truth. If it were, the danger would be easy to recognize. But complacency does not sound alarms or set off warning bells. It does not shake the earth beneath your feet. Instead, it settles over you like a soft, comfortable fog, dulling your senses so gradually that you do not even notice you can no longer see the path ahead. A man does not abandon his post in a single moment. He first grows weary of watching. He tells himself there is no immediate danger, that the enemy is far off or perhaps not coming at all. He allows himself to sit down, then to rest, then to sleep. And when at last the enemy does arrive, he does not need to break down the gates, they are already unlocked. This is how the enemy works, not in sudden and obvious destruction, but in slow and unnoticed decay. He does not charge in with weapons raised, he does not need to. He simply waits for men to grow comfortable, to relax their guard, to convince themselves that vigilance is unnecessary. The house need not be burned to the ground if the foundation is left to crumble. The city need not be stormed if its watchmen have wandered away. The danger is greatest for those who believe themselves safest. A man who is aware of the battle will fight. A man who knows he is under attack will call for aid. But a man who believes there is no danger will not even reach for his sword. It is not the weak who are most at risk. It is the ones who believe they are strong enough to stand on their own. Complacency is the enemy's greatest ally because it disguises itself as peace. It whispers that the war is over, that there is no longer a need for effort, that the days of struggle have passed. And so faith becomes routine, prayer becomes a formality. The fire that once burned brightly turns to embers, and the man who once stood firm begins to drift without even realizing he has moved. It is a slow process, almost imperceptible. There is no single moment where everything is lost. Only a series of small, seemingly insignificant choices. A morning prayer delayed, a verse of scripture left unread, a conviction left unspoken. None of these on their own seem like failures, but together, over time, they weave a pattern of neglect, a slow descent into spiritual sleep. And by the time the soul stirs again, it may find itself in unfamiliar territory far from where it once stood. There is a terrible irony in complacency. It is often born not out of weakness, but out of past victories. A man who has fought well, who has stood firm, who has seen the hand of God in his life, may begin to think that he has done enough, that he has reached a place where he can rest without fear. And so, he lets his guard down, not in defiance, but in quiet confidence. He does not see that the very moment he stops fighting is the moment he begins to lose. The greatest falls do not come from those who are struggling to stand. They come from those who believe they are too secure to stumble. A soldier who knows he is in battle will remain ready. But a man who believes the war is won will lay down his weapons. And when the enemy comes, he will have nothing left with which to fight. To ignore the signs of spiritual decay is no different than welcoming the enemy at the gate. The result is the same. Whether a man opens the door himself or simply neglects to lock it, the house is still taken. Whether a city lowers its walls willingly or lets them fall into ruin, it is still conquered. The method matters little, the outcome is inevitable. And so the danger is not only in the temptations that come with force and fury, it is in the slow erosion of conviction, in the small compromises that seem harmless, in the quiet, creeping decay that is allowed to spread because no one thinks it is urgent to stop it. It is not enough to have once been vigilant. It is not enough to have once fought well. The battle does not end while life still remains. And so, the choice is not whether to stand guard or to rest, the choice is whether to stand at all. For the one who watches, who remains awake, who keeps his soul ready, is the one who will not be taken by surprise when the enemy comes. But the one who sleeps, who assumes the danger has passed, who mistakes complacency for peace, he will wake too late, and when he does, he will find that the battle was never over at all. This fight is not yours alone. If you understand the urgency of this hour, pause, subscribe. Let this be more than a passing thought. Share your insight in the comments, for iron sharpens iron, and your words may awaken another soul. There is a peculiar danger in the slumber of the soul, for it is not like the sleep of the body. When a man lies down at night, he knows he is resting. He feels the weight of his eyelids, the slowing of his thoughts, the stillness of his limbs. But the soul's sleep is far more subtle. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like sleep at all. It feels like comfort, like routine, like the ordinary passing of days. It feels like nothing is wrong, and that is its most deadly deception. The man whose soul sleeps does not know he is asleep. He moves through life with a sense of familiarity, saying the same prayers, attending the same services, speaking the same words of faith, and yet something within him has grown dull. What once stirred his heart now feels distant. The flame that once burned bright is now but a faint glow, a memory of fire rather than a living blaze. This is how the enemy prefers it. He does not fear a man who calls himself a Christian, but lives as though God is a distant thought. He does not tremble before a faith that is formal but lifeless. What he fears is a soul fully awake, a heart set aflame with a holy urgency, for a sleeping man cannot fight, but a man who is awake will reach for his sword. And so the call is not merely to believe, but to awaken. To rouse yourself from the quiet, creeping comfort that lulls the spirit into a state of half-awareness. It is not enough to know the truth if the truth no longer moves you. It is not enough to speak of faith if faith no longer shapes your every step. The soul must be stirred, shaken from its drowsiness, made alert once more. Awakening the soul begins with a recognition, a realization that the greatest danger is not always the enemy at the gate, but the slow decay within. It is an awareness that the battle never ceased. Though the silence made it seem so, it is understanding that just because the skies are clear today does not mean the war is over. The enemy does not rest. Why then should you? But awakening is more than a mere stirring of emotion. It is not a passing moment of inspiration or a fleeting sense of conviction. It is a deliberate sharpening of the spirit, like a sword drawn from its sheath and honed against the stone. A sword does not sharpen itself by accident, nor does faith. It requires effort, the daily, sometimes painful work of seeking God not out of habit, but out of hunger. A man who awakens his soul does not wait until he feels strong. He does not linger until the mood is right. He trains his heart in the quiet hours when no one is watching. He prays not because he feels a sudden rush of passion, but because he knows his soul depends on it. He reads the word not as a task to complete, but as a weapon to wield. He does not wait for battle to prepare. He prepares so that when battle comes, he will stand. And the sharpening of faith is not done in a single moment. It is a daily act of war against spiritual dullness, just as a soldier does not sharpen his blade once and expect it to remain keen, so too must the believer continually tend to his faith. Every prayer, every act of obedience, every moment spent in the presence of God, these are the whetstones against which the soul is kept ready. But let there be no mistake, this awakening is not an act of human will alone. A man may strike the flint, but the spark comes from the hand of God. It is his spirit that ignites the flame, his power that breathes life into the weary heart. Yet he does not awaken those who wish to remain asleep. He knocks, but he will not break down the door. The soul must desire to wake. It must long for the fire to burn again. And what happens when the soul awakens? It does not simply return to the way it once was. No, it rises stronger, fiercer, more determined. The man whose faith has been sharpened through watchfulness is no longer easily swayed by the world's distractions. He does not crumble at the first sign of hardship. He stands not because he is unafraid, but because his trust is anchored in something deeper than fear. To awaken the soul is to reclaim the ground that was slowly surrendered to complacency. It is to break free from the chains of routine and step once more into the living, breathing reality of faith. It is to rise from the slumber of apathy and take up the sword of the Spirit, ready for whatever battle may come. For a sleeping soul is no threat to the enemy, but a soul on fire, awake, alert, sharpened like a blade, that is a danger to the kingdom of darkness. And it is this kind of soul that the world so desperately needs, not half-hearted believers content with empty habits, but men and women whose faith is a blazing flame, whose prayers shake the heavens, whose lives proclaim with every step that they are fully awake. It is a strange and perilous thing that many walk through life as though they are in peacetime, while all around them, unseen, a war rages. They rise in the morning, tend to their affairs, speak of faith as though it were a distant ideal, all the while unguarded, exposed, like soldiers who have laid down their weapons and wandered onto the battlefield unarmed. It is not that they do not believe in the enemy's existence, they simply do not think themselves at risk. And so they live, vulnerable, convinced that a quiet day means a safe one. But the battle has never ceased. It is not the kind fought with swords and shields, where the clash of metal can be heard, and the enemy's banner is seen from afar. No, this war is of a subtler, deadlier kind, a spiritual war, where the attacks come not against the body, but the mind, the heart, the soul. It is a war of whispers more than shouts, of doubts more than wounds, of unseen arrows flying in the dark. So many stand in this battle with nothing to protect them. No armor, no weapons, only a vague hope that their faith, neglected though it may be, will somehow hold when the day of trial comes. But hope is not a shield, and wishful thinking does not stop an arrow. That is why we are told to put on the whole armor of God, not a portion of it, not the parts we find comfortable, but every piece. For this is not ornamental armor, meant to be admired from a distance. It is battle-worn and necessary, forged for those who understand that to follow Christ is to march into war every day. The belt of truth comes first, not because it is the most glamorous piece, but because without it, all else falls apart. Truth holds the armor together, keeps everything in place. Without truth, a man is already defeated. He may have the appearance of faith, but if he does not cling to what is real, what is eternal, he fights only with shadows. The enemy's first strike is often against this belt, whispering lies disguised as reason, hoping you will loosen your grip on what God has said. If he can unfasten the belt, the rest will soon follow. Then there is the breastplate of righteousness. It guards the heart, the place from which all actions flow. This is not a righteousness of our own making. It is not stitched together by good deeds or human effort. It is the righteousness of Christ, imputed to us, and it covers the heart like a shield. The enemy knows that if he can pierce the heart, fill it with guilt, shame, or pride, he can turn even the most faithful soldier into a cowering deserter. But the breastplate stands firm, not because we are strong, but because he is. The shoes of the gospel of peace are not simply for standing, they are for moving. A soldier must be ready to march, to advance, to carry the message of the kingdom wherever he goes. These shoes do not promise ease or comfort. They are not slippers. They are war boots, meant for rough terrain. The peace they offer is not the absence of conflict, but the unshakable assurance that no matter how fierce the battle, we walk in step with the one who has already claimed the victory. And what of the shield of faith? It is not a small decorative piece, but a great, broad shield, large enough to cover the whole body, strong enough to extinguish the fiery darts of the enemy. Those darts are not always the obvious attacks. They are the sudden fears, the creeping doubts, the unexpected trials that strike without warning. Faith does not stop the arrows from flying, but it keeps them from finding their mark. It is not faith in ourselves, nor faith in an easy life. It is faith in the unchanging nature of God, in his promises, in his unfailing word. The helmet of salvation guards the mind, for if the enemy cannot wound the heart, he will aim for the head. He will twist your thoughts, cloud your judgment, make you question your worth, your purpose, even your very salvation. The helmet reminds you of who you are and whose you are. It declares that your salvation is not a fragile thing, easily lost, but a sealed promise kept by the one who cannot lie. With the helmet firmly in place, the enemy's lies break against the truth like waves against a rock. Finally, the sword of the Spirit, the word of God. It is the only offensive weapon, and yet so many leave it untouched. They carry it as a relic, quoting a verse here and there, but never wielding it as the living, active blade it is meant to be. The word is not a collection of comforting phrases. It is a weapon forged by God himself, sharp enough to cut through deception, strong enough to drive back the darkness. It is not enough to own a sword. It must be drawn. It must be used. The enemy does not fear a closed Bible. And what binds all this armor together, what gives it strength and purpose, is prayer. Without prayer, the armor is like a suit of steel with no soldier inside, Prayer animates the armor, it fuels the fight. It is not a last resort, nor a mere formality. It is the breath of the spiritual warrior, the steady rhythm of a heart that knows it cannot stand alone. To put on the armor of God is not a one-time event. It is a daily discipline, a constant vigilance. The battle does not pause simply because you wish it would. The enemy does not take days off. Each morning you must fasten the belt, adjust the breastplate, lace up the shoes, lift the shield, place the helmet on your head, and take the sword in hand. And then you stand not in your strength, but in his. For the fight is real, the enemy is relentless, but the armor is impenetrable, and the one who has given it to you is already victorious. It is a strange thing about hope, the way it seems at once both fragile and unyielding. To those who stand outside of it, hope appears almost foolish, a delicate thing easily crushed by the weight of hardship. And yet, to those who possess it, true hope is as unbreakable as steel. It does not shatter in the storm, it clings all the tighter. It is not a soft whisper, it is a battle cry. When crisis looms, when disaster seems all but certain, it is easy to believe that hope has no place. The world will tell you that hope is for the naive, for those who cannot bear to face reality. They will call it wishful thinking, a fragile dream that will surely wither beneath the heat of suffering. But this is because the world does not understand what hope truly is. Hope, in the truest sense, is not a blind denial of danger. It is not closing one's eyes to the gathering storm. Rather, it is the fierce and steady resolve that stands firm in spite of the storm. It does not pretend a crisis isn't real. It acknowledges the danger, feels the fear, and still refuses to bow before it. There is a reason why hope must be anchored in something greater than ourselves. If hope rests solely in human strength, it will surely collapse when that strength fails, and fail it will. If it relies on favorable circumstances, it will crumble when the winds shift. But the hope that endures, the hope that remains unyielding even when disaster strikes, is the hope fixed not on what can be seen, but on what cannot be shaken. This hope does not promise an escape from the battle. It does not guarantee that the storm will pass quickly or that the enemy will falter. What it promises is far more profound, that even if the world around you falls into chaos, you will stand, not because you are strong, but because you are upheld by one who cannot be moved. It is in the darkest moments that hope shines the brightest. Consider the soldier on the battlefield, surrounded by foes, his comrades falling one by one. The world would call him a fool for still believing in victory. And yet he does not surrender. Why? Because his hope does not rest in what he sees before him. His hope is anchored in the unyielding promise that the war, though fierce, has already been won. This is the great secret of hope. It looks beyond the immediate, beyond the crisis, beyond the pain. It does not dismiss the suffering, but it refuses to be ruled by it. For the one who clings to hope knows that victory is not always seen with the eyes, it is often a reality grasped only by faith. And so when disaster strikes, when fear rises like a tide, hope does not retreat, it does not break. It becomes a weapon, it becomes a shield. It is the steady hand that grips the sword when every voice says to lay it down. It is the light that flickers but never dies, even when the night stretches long. But hope is not passive. It does not sit quietly, waiting for the storm to pass. It acts. It prays boldly. Not because the situation seems favorable, but because it knows who holds the outcome. It speaks truth, not because it expects an immediate change, but because it trusts that truth will always stand, no matter how loud the lies. It moves forward not because the path is clear, but because it walks by faith, not by sight. There is an unyielding defiance in true hope. It looks the disaster squarely in the eye and says, "You may rage, but you will not win." It stands in the face of fear and declares, "You may shake me, but I will not fall." It whispers in the darkest hour, "The dawn is coming." Not because the dawn is visible yet, but because the one who promised it cannot lie. This hope does not depend on whether the crisis ends swiftly or whether the pain subsides immediately. It does not crumble when prayers seem unanswered or when the battle stretches longer than expected. No, this hope endures because it knows that in the end, victory is not determined by the present struggle, but by the unchanging promise of God. The victory is not in the absence of struggle. It is in standing firm through it. It is in holding fast when everything around you says to let go. It is in choosing faith when fear seems more reasonable. It is in lifting your head, even when the weight of sorrow tries to bow it down. And the beauty of this hope is that it does not belong only to the strong. It belongs to the weak, the weary, the wounded. It is not reserved for those who have never stumbled. It is for those who have fallen 1,000 times and still rise again. This hope does not mock the broken-hearted. It draws near to them. It does not scorn the fearful. It strengthens them. For the battle may rage, the disaster may strike, the storm may howl, but hope stands firm. Not because the struggle is easy, but because the victory has already been won. And those who anchor themselves in this hope will never be put to shame. So let the storm rage, let the enemy roar, let the night stretch long. For hope is not a flickering candle, but a blazing fire. It is not the absence of fear, but the defiance of it. Stand firm, not because the battle is easy, but because the victory is already assured. The darkness may press close, but it cannot snuff out the light. The enemy may wound, but he cannot conquer. For the one who stands behind you is greater than the forces against you, and the promise that anchors your soul is unbreakable. So lift your head, grip your sword, and press on, not with trembling hands, but with the fierce, unyielding hope that knows the final word has already been spoken. Victory is the Lord's. The battle rages, but hope endures. Stand firm, and let this be only the beginning of your preparation. Subscribe to walk this path together, and speak boldly in the comments. Your faith may kindle a flame in someone still standing in the shadows.